Joining us, managing editor of The Bulwark and MS Now contributor Sam Stein, host of the Fast Politics podcast and MS Now political analyst Molly Jong-Fast, and co-founder and director of economic policy at Veda Partners, Henrietta Trace. Henrietta, get us started on the economy. Dow is back down today as the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Gas prices are up, and people are not experiencing the economy that Donald Trump says he is selling.
It's pretty amazing when you think about what the president inherited. We were coming off of continuous prosperity, lowering inflation, prices coming down, growth in the manufacturing sector. I mean, even with the Ozempic boom, airlines were planning to save hundreds of millions of dollars on just jet fuel because people weighed less. I mean, there was literally nothing you could do to stop the economy under the AI boom and all the rest. And now here we are. We're not just dealing with jet fuel price surges up 95%, but now we have outright shortages. So across Asia, there are halted flights. They have 3-day work weeks because they're trying to conserve fuel. That's moving over to the EU. In the United States, we are feeling that pain too. Airplane prices are up $200 on flights, and some are just being canceled altogether. Food inflation is the next shoe to drop. Everything that takes diesel or gasoline to move, whether it's, everything you buy at Walmart or your groceries from the store, all that is still to come and to get more expensive. So the long-term costs of this war, especially when you're judging it by the economy that the president was handed, is really just depressing to think about the growth that we could be under. Instead, we're dealing with rising inflation again. The Fed can't cut interest rates. It's a bummer.
Let me play the energy secretary talking about when gas prices are going to come down.
When do you think it's realistic for Americans to expect that gas will go back to under $3 a gallon?
I don't know. That could happen later this year. That might not happen until next year.
The administration, Henrietta, has been all over the place on this. Last week, Scott Bessent was saying, look between June and September for it to come down. Maybe not, he would argue, to below $3 a gallon. But should we expect, say the war ends tomorrow, that gas prices are going to go down from their high today between June and September? Or are you really looking at next year for when things might settle back down?
No, I mean, you've got to get through. First of all, prices come down twice as slowly as they rise. And you have to clear the backlog of the tankers that are in the strait. That's going to take months. And then you've forgotten about the fact, obviously, at the presidential level, that 80 of the facilities that create crude, which is a global commodity, have been bombed, including the largest LNG facility on planet Earth. So if you wanted to move things along and get it done in a couple of weeks and just quickly reopen the strait, it implies a lack of understanding of the situation that you're in that is overwhelming. There's no chance that crude comes and gas comes back down to the pre-February 28th levels in months. That's the trajectory that we're working on. And of course, the strait is not reopened, and you have structural real problems like the toll that the Iranians are forcing people to pay, which Western companies will not pay. And therefore, the tankers aren't moving. They haven't even touched on that issue yet, amongst so many others.
All right, let me play Susie Wiles back in 2025, last year, talking about what this year was going to look like ahead of the midterms.
He's going to have a fun next year, but we're going to put him on the campaign trail, too. Typically, just a little bit of campaign speak, if I may.
Yeah.
Typically, in the midterms, it's not about who's sitting at the White House. It's you localize the election,
right,
and you keep the federal officials out of it. We're actually going to turn that on its head.
Good.
And put him on the ballot. Because so many of those low propensity voters are Trump voters.
Yes, they are.
And we saw a week ago Tuesday what happens when he's not on the ballot and not active. So I haven't quite broken it to him yet, but he's going to campaign like it's 2024 again.
I wonder, Sam, is Susie still feeling this way? Because we're going to look at Donald Trump's approval ratings. I mentioned them, but let's take a look at the numbers. 37% approve, again, record low for this term. On the cost of living, only a 32% approval. It's even lower. On the gas prices, majority of Americans, not even a close majority, 65% of voters blame him for the rise in gas prices. And I'll show you some more stuff on the economy. So do you think Susie's saying to the president today, Sam, get out there and campaign? Do you think candidates who are running want the president to campaign with him?
Well, look, those numbers you're showing are obviously not good.
but those are taken before the completion of the ballroom. You haven't accommodated for the fact that he'll get a huge burst in public support for the ballroom. And same with those.
Well, I mean, maybe they haven't
statistics.
heard about how much he's saving on the curtains.
Yeah, the curtains. Yeah, we got a campaign on the curtains. A lot of cost savings there. Obviously, he's not going to be the salve for the Republican Party if the numbers are at this point, and if the war is continuing, and if gas prices have not gone down significantly. There's not much, by the way, that he can champion on the trail. Maybe there would have been a couple months prior when the economy was in a bit of better shape, although it's arguable that it was in good shape back then. But what is the proactive case that he's going to make? Even on the strong suits that he's had, for instance, immigration, right? That's turned negative among the voting populace. They're fine with what he's done on the border. They're supportive of the closure of the border. But by and large, every data point at this juncture shows that they're against the deportation raids and deportation campaigns. They think he's gone too far there. So there's not much that Trump can bring on to the campaign trail this go-around. I will say this, the two things just to add as caveats. One is Susie Wiles is right in that anecdotal history shows that Trump voters, people who really like Trump, do not come out for the midterms or when he's not on the ballot. And so to a degree, they're in a bind. They do have to have him out there to motivate voters. And the other thing that I would just add is that, as Pat's his prologue here, they're going to come up with something as a fear tactic. If you remember, it was the caravans, I believe, in 2010 or something like that. Not 2010, sorry, 2018. The caravans that were going to come in and destroy American cities. They will have a boogeyman. They haven't found it yet, but it will be brought to bear, and it will be a scare tactic to get people not just to vote for Republicans, but to vote against Democrats.
It didn't work in 2018. I'll point that out. And I think, Sam, you're right to point out that the low propensity voters that don't show up when Donald Trump is not on the ballot, yeah, that's true. But a lot of these races are purple races. And if you're sending Donald Trump out to purple districts, like a Mike Lawler district, for instance, with his approval numbers this bad, broadly speaking, I know MAGA voters are in the tank for him by and large. But when you're looking at these overall approvals and the independent, the swing voter issue, if you're sending him to a purple district, is that a good idea, Molly?
Look, part of the problem with Donald Trump is you can't control what he says or does, which is what Susie Wiles has found herself in as a problem. I look back to the DoorDash granny of last week, right? So this was a stunt. She came in. She was to highlight no tax on tips. And you saw Donald Trump tried to get her engaged on this culture war issue. Remember? He said, well, what do you think about women's sports? Right? Because that issue he had been able to use to divide the voters in a way. And it had worked for him in 24. And she said, well, I'm just sort of trying to, she basically sort of said, I don't have an opinion on that, which I think is a really bad sign for Trump at this moment, because these issues have worked. Had they been sort of able to use them as meat for the base, and they were these Trump voters who would say, well, these are the things. They're sort of dog whistles to his people, and these things are not moving the same thing. They're not moving voters in the same way. And I think part of that is because gas is so expensive, and part of that is you have a president who has literally who ran on making things cheaper, and then got into office and did a number of things that made things more expensive: tariffs, the war in Iran. And these things, I just don't think there's a historical precedent for running as a candidate who is focused on making things cheaper and then immediately doing everything to make things more expensive.
Molly, have the Democrats seized effectively on any of this?
So I would say this. They're running in every seat, which I think is good. So you're running in places where they're looking at seats that might not have been realistic in even 2018 because they see the partisan win. So in some ways, yes, we've seen a lot of successful messaging. I mean, a great example was Madame Mamdani was on Meet the Press, and she asked him who he liked for his 2028 pick, and he said he was laser focused on affordability. That was a great example of how not to fall into a trap. So I think there are some ways in which they're doing well, and in other ways, if you look at the DNC fundraising numbers, those numbers are not great.
Sam, any thoughts on that?
I mean, this is where I think Susie Wiles is wrong. I think ultimately these elections are a referendum. They are. Ask any incumbent president who's been in a midterm cycle. They'll do whatever it takes to make it a choice about the future, but it is going to be a referendum on your record. And so Democrats, to a degree, really just have to keep the focus on Trump. They have to say he's failed in his promises, as Molly notes, to bring down prices, that he's brought a level of corruption to the administration, to the White House, that has been unprecedented. You could point to the ballroom. And that there's chaos overseas, even though he promised to end wars. I mean, to the degree that they can just make it about that, they don't have to answer a lot of questions. Now, I do think that the more talented Democrats, the more thoughtful Democrats, and I think you saw this with Pete Buttigieg over the weekend, will say, well, it can't just be about fixing the stuff that Trump did wrong. It has to be about a forward-looking vision. But if you're being honest about it, if Democrats are being honest about it, that's a conversation for December. That's not a conversation for pre-November. Pre-November, it's got to be about Trump if they want to win.